Through the Mayhem, the Silently podcast series, bringing marketing industry leaders together to discuss the ever-shifting media landscape. Learn about the ins and outs of real-time marketing, influencers, data privacy, technology, and so much more. All from industry experts with real experience, giving you the real answers. Now, let's break through the mayhem.
Welcome to Breaking Through the Mayhem. We have today from, self-proclaimed, but for me proclaimed an absolute legend in the industry, somebody that I've admired for the whole time I've been in this industry, and I can't believe he's here. I'm excited to have Rishad Tobaccowala today. For anyone that doesn't know him, I'm going to let him give a quick intro on himself, but from my perspective, all you need to know, this guy is in the Hall of Fame. Anyone that's in the Hall of Fame with such a small crew of people is just phenomenal. So thank you for being here. Tell the audience a little bit about yourself, Rishad, and I'm excited to talk to you today.
Fantastic. Well, Adam, thank you for inviting me. So I basically today am a self-employed person who helps people see, think, and feel differently about how to grow themselves, their teams, and their business. And I do it in three different ways. One to many, which is a fancy way of saying I write books, I write a Substack, and I have a podcast. One to some, which is a fancy way of saying I do keynotes at executive offsites and workshops. And one to one, which is a fancy way of saying advisory, which is not really consulting, it's advisory, where I work with both some large companies, private equity, and startups. Prior to this 6-year second career, my first career, I spent 37 years at a company called the Publicis Group, where over the course of those 37 years, half of which was actually Publicis and half was a company that I worked at before Publicis Group bought us, which was companies like Leo Burnett and Stalking. I spent a career, that 37-year career had me work in pretty much every aspect of the business, in every sort of role, from client service to integrated marketing to digital marketing to media. I ran small companies and grew them to 100. I was the chairman of large companies like Digitas and Razorfish, which had 10,000 employees. And for the last 5 years, I was there as a full-time employee. I worked for Maurice Levy as his chief strategist and growth officer. And we purchased companies like Epsilon and Sapient, among others. And then I started my second career, though I continue to be an advisor to Publicis, but now I work for myself.
Well, most people, Rishad, don't stay at companies very long. 37 years, what do you think kept you there that long? And it sounds like you always were evolving, but what kind of shaped your willingness to stay that long, and what kept you around?
So there are actually three reasons, and the first two might sound like I'm kidding, but it's not, and the third one is the real reason, but the first two are true. So one is I don't really like change. So I work for the same company, I've lived in the same city, I have the same wife, right? So it's like I'm not a change person. The second is also true. Not once in my 37-year career did anybody give me a job offer. So maybe I stayed because I had no other options. Okay. And eventually my option was to hire myself, since nobody was going to hire me. So for the next 6 years, I've hired myself. But third, which is and those both are true, by the way, which is quite surprising, but it's true. The third one is the truest, which is I didn't actually stay in the same company. I worked in many different companies. It just so happened that if you look at my LinkedIn profile, you'll see different company names. You'll see Digitas, Razorfish, Denews, Starcom IP, Leo Burnett, Publicis. And so we evolved and I evolved. And so I often basically told people I managed to grow myself and grow my opportunities and grow my skills and, grow my career while I worked in a company that was growing. And so I did not have to leave, because anytime I wanted to leave, I just created something or switched brands and I could stay in the same place.
It's unbelievable. I mean, so basically you just were always evolving. That's really what
Yes.
it sounds like. And as much as you don't like change, you change throughout that evolving all the time. So what would you say kind of centered you in your ability to grow
So
throughout?
there were there were two or three realities, which is what I would advise everybody who listens here. So one is I truly do believe that change sucks because when you change, you don't know what you're doing. It's one of the reasons why when people come to you, they say it's a great restaurant. They say, let's go together. It's a great bottle of wine. Let's share it. But they come to you and say change is good and they leave the room, right? They never say, let's do change together. And when they come and tell me change is good, I say, I'm happy. You can change if you like. And they leave the room. So it's not whether change is good or bad. Change is really difficult. But the way I set it up is while change does suck, irrelevance is even worse.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't have nailed that better.
Right. And so the choice is, do I want to be irrelevant or do I want to do this sucky thing called change? So I said, okay, in order to have a successful career, I can stay in the same company, I can stay in the same place, I can stay in a lot of different things, but I myself, I'm going to have to learn to change myself and do new things. Um, and what I began to realize over time was if I was looking hard enough, many of my colleagues started saying, we don't need to change, we have arrived at a place. And what woke me up is some amazing people I worked with in my career were great. And then 3 years later, they didn't have a job. And their whole stuff was they would ask me, like, why are you worrying about this internet thing? You're in your 40s. This won't happen. And if it does, you're already senior. Why are you worried about this social media thing? Why are you learning stuff like Twitter? Why are you doing this thing? And what would happen is 2 or 3 years later, they didn't have a job. And the reason was because their clients basically said, I want people who know these things. And guess who knew those things? I did. And who also understood business because I was senior enough. Obviously, there were lots of people who knew this, but I both knew the old traditions and the old school stuff, and I knew all the new things. So senior people became comfortable with me because I didn't go up and say, you suck. I used to be sometimes older than them. And I say, here's how you can do this, but this is why we have to do to stay relevant. So that is my basic thing that what kept me going was the recognition I didn't want to be irrelevant, the seeing that if I didn't change, but more importantly, that when I did, I became very valuable to clients and therefore to the company.
I mean, what's crazy is irrelevance feels today like it could happen quicker than ever before without
Yes, it
things
is. And
movable.
exactly. So in the old days, I used to say it takes about 3 to 5 years to become irrelevant. So, you can pretend for 3 to 5 years. Now I basically believe it's 1 to 2, and 2 might be a stretch. Uh, and as a result, when people say I will be retired, so I said, yes, if you're going to be retired in 2025, you can be okay. But if you plan to work in 2026, which is 10 months from now, you won't be okay. That wakes people up. So I said, even if you think you're 55 and you think you're going to retire in 5 years, you won't get to 56. So be prepared to be forcibly retired at 56 if you aren't going to adapt and change.
And how would you recommend different generations today to change? What's your principles that you look at?
So everybody has a different way of approaching things, but what I would basically say, there are 3 fundamental truths to change. First is to acknowledge that it is difficult and that you're going to be going through a difficult phase, but your choice is otherwise irrelevance that keeps you on the path. So don't fool yourself thinking it's easy, right? Because it's like when you decide to exercise, you twist yourself into new shapes, it hurts and it's hard. So that's number one. So recognize it's difficult and maybe start doing it in little bits, but get ready to do it. That's number one. The second one is one way to do it is to allocate an hour a day to learn. And if you spend an hour a day learning new things, and it could be work related, could be other things. And it doesn't necessarily mean reading a book. It could be watching a YouTube video, talking to somebody who can talk to you about something. Um, and do that or try to have a new experience every day. So I'll give you an example. What I try to do is at the end of every day, I basically ask, what new experience did I have today? Besides, like, did I spend an hour learning, which is what I do, but what new experience did I have today? That sometimes it doesn't happen every day, but I've never gone a week where I've not had a new experience 4 to 5 days out of 7, right? And I program it. And so what does a new experience mean? It doesn't mean like flying off and going to a different place. It means the following. Like, I'll give you 3 things I did yesterday and day before. So today I haven't done a new experience yet. Outside of, like I mentioned, I had an opportunity to talk to John Hagarty, which I've never got to do, but I won't, but what happened is I was in the city of Atlanta to give a talk. I had a dinner meeting and then I had a talk yesterday. So the day that for the dinner meeting, I had a little bit of time. So I flew in a little early and I decided to go and spend 2 hours at the Georgia Aquarium, which is the world's largest aquarium in the Western world. So it's only now, I think, one in Singapore and maybe one in Shanghai that's bigger. But until 4 years ago, it was the world's largest aquarium. And so I popped up my $60 ticket and I went in and I spent 2 hours there. The next day, which was yesterday, it was a very filled day because I was speaking.
What was your favorite part of the aquarium?
My favorite part of the aquarium actually is the beluga whales. They have this entire thing called the beluga whales. But they've also, the way they've got it, they've got like, rivers and oceans and salt water, and it's really, really cool. And so I did that. And then it's set in near Olympic Park. So there's next to it is the world of Coca-Cola and a whole bunch of other things. So I said, that's cool. The next day I knew I wouldn't have much time because I'd both doing this presentation, then another presentation, then I had a couple of calls and then a plane ride. So I said, what do I do? Now, I've never been to a Waffle House. So I said, I am going to go have breakfast at a Waffle House. So I found a Waffle House and I hung out and I took pictures of a Waffle House and saw how a Waffle House operated. Okay. Including that their prices are really reasonable. So I'm now strongly thinking that maybe I'm going to eat it off Waffle Houses. Okay. Yes, they do have the 50-cent premium for an egg, but I ordered a waffle. And there was an amazing waffle they give you for $5.45. My entire bill with tip and coffee was $7.55. Right.
Wow.
And so because it was $6 and I tipped, $1.50, which is 25%. So it was $7.50 for the whole goddamn thing. And my whole stuff is, I think that's where writers should hang out, Waffle Houses. So you can see what I mean by, and I cannot tell you about Waffle Houses, how they operate, what they do, because I'm observing and looking at what's going on. I can tell you about beluga whales. Okay. That's what I mean by, you have to have a mind that's evolving. And so that's what I basically did. And the other thing you want to basically do is you also want to see where there are opportunities. So if you basically see that clients have a particular demand, you might want to figure out, can you meet that demand? I mean, obviously, if a client wants a demand for basketball players, I can't do that, right? I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff you can't do because of either your physical limitations or your interest limitations. So I can't be a pianist, I can't be a basketball player. On the other hand, maybe something I'm particularly, like I can do a really good job being an advertising executive right now, if that's what I wanted. But I'm no longer passionate about doing that, so I wouldn't do that. So you ideally want to find a place where you're good at doing something, you're interested in doing something, and someone will pay you to do that thing.
And you can also bring a result that could have an impact.
Yeah, and that's one of the key things. The other way to also think about when you spend your time is I basically say, if I'm going to spend the next hour on anything, and this is true in almost every circumstance outside of a few, I said I'll only spend it if AI can help somebody or it can create some value for myself, usually of learning. Potentially it could be like a financial outcome or whatever. Or 3, if it's really fun.
So
right.
Thinking on all that, would you rather meet a new person you've never spoken to in your whole life or see someone you know for 40 years? Which knowing you always want to do something new and learn. What kind of
the good news is because
tip those tails.
So the good news is because we have 24 hours in a day, you can do a lot of both, right? And you aren't limited to who you need to talk to, one. But so the way I look at it is, part of it is a lot of people say change and therefore you have to change completely. No, not really. So what I do is I combine what I call roots and wings. Okay. So there's lots of stuff that I do every day, which is the same old thing, right? I speak to my wife, I speak to my daughters, I get up in the morning, I read, I do some sort of like working out, all of that kind of stuff. I start every morning with what I call coffee takeoffs, which is 2 dopios. And in the evening, I have alcoholic landings, which is 2 beers. Okay. Those are like fixed, which is what I basically call the base through which I've got fixed, the roots. Then, knowing that I have my base camp, I go out exploring into the world, knowing that if I get crushed, I come back to my base camp and lick my
Got it.
wounds and go back
So
again.
no matter what, you're gonna have your lift
Yeah.
off and your ending. So
Yeah,
whatever
exactly.
whatever happens in between, it's gonna be what it's gonna be. It might be a
Ex-
beluga whale, it
Yeah,
could be a Waffle House.
yeah, exactly. It could be anything that can happen. And sometimes it's like a terrible meeting and you come back and say you want to hate everybody.
So do you like exploring alone or with someone else? What's kind of your were you at Waffle House by yourself? What
Yeah,
was-
so both the beluga whale thing and the Waffle House was by myself because the beluga whale thing was I had a couple of hours. I said if I call people in Atlanta and say come to the aquarium with me, they'll say, here's the issue. What happens is you call somebody you know in a city, right? They say let's go have a meal. They don't say let's go to the aquarium together. And
because
I'd
they've
like to
been
have
there.
they've been there before. And my old stuff is I'd like to have a meal with you, but I'd also like to see the aquarium.
Got it.
So I'll go to see the aquarium. So many of these cases, it's me by myself, but not every time.
Is your wife like this spontaneous or no?
She is. She's in fact more spontaneous, and in fact, my whole stuff is have a plan. So like you know, tomorrow we live in Chicago, so tomorrow we go to the Chicago Botanical Gardens because there's an orchid show. So she basically said, free up your afternoon. I said, okay, I can do that. We're going to the orchid show. And she said, can we go today? I said, no, today it can't happen. She said, you can't move things around. I said, no, I can't move things around today. We can move it tomorrow. Okay. Exactly. And so the other is, I've got 2 grown-up daughters. So between them and my wife, I always thought that I would have no bosses, but I still have 3.
That's hilarious. In terms of like the next phase of what you want in your career in life, I mean, obviously your underpinning is learning, new adventure, and thinking. Like what made you start to write?
Well, I always wanted to write. So what's really interesting is when I went to college, I wanted to be a writer. And my parents, who actually gave me the love of reading and writing, told me no. Okay. And they said, we don't advise you to do that for 2 reasons. One is you have nothing to say yet. So what are you going to write about? Okay. So they said, learn things, live a life, then write. Otherwise, you have
Interesting.
nothing to say about. Now, it's not completely true. People at 17, 18 have things to say, but whatever. That was one. And the second, they basically said, learn something that you would not learn. That's why you're going to school. They didn't care about the fact that whether I made money or did not make money, but they said, learn things that you would normally not go, which you naturally won't do. They'll say you'll naturally read, you'll naturally write. Okay, what would I not naturally do? Learn mathematics. So that's what I went. I went and got mathematics. And then, I then wrote my first book when I said, finally, I can actually write a book, which is a key thing. And, and my books were a combination. I wanted to write, but then I had something to say. So both my books, is I have something to say where I think I can add value to the world, which is just different and distinct. So that's what got me to writing.
Do you think your parents were right?
They were absolutely right in the fact that my books have done well and people read me because I have something to say. And there are 3 things and something to say. I have something to say that is useful to them. Like I gotta have something to say and they'll say, okay, that's interesting, but not for us. That's one. I have something to say that's useful to them. Second is, it is believable because it's grounded in my life experiences. So it doesn't seem academic. Now, so it's not like a piece of academic research, if that makes sense. And third is, I kept writing all those years. I wasn't writing books, but I was writing WordPress, Substack, decks, creatives, right? So I eventually honed my art. So not only do I have something to say and something that will resonate with the right audience, but something that's great to read, right? So the whole idea is engagement is a combination of relevance and likability. And relevance is this for me? And likability is this enjoyable? And if you think about it, when you have those two, you like something because it's like, I'm learning something, this is relevant to me, and hey, it's fun.
So you talk about, for example, the speed factor of change, right? From being relevant. And obviously, I think people are exhausted, but also excited by the word AI, right? I mean,
Mhm.
obviously, everybody's an AI company out of nowhere, even though not everybody is. But my thought process, do you feel like with AI coming, the authenticity of writing is going to struggle? Like, what is your perspective on that?
So here's what I basically believe is we are living in a world where if you are a mediocre in anything, the machine will do it better than you. Okay.
See,
But if you are good, you can build expertise. I'm not talking experience. You can build expertise, you can buy crystallized intelligence. Then working with the machine, right, will make you really, really, really good, and the machine won't be as good. So I'll give you sort of an idea. When I was writing my book, my second book, I actually got the machine to write the book along with me. Okay. And the reason is because what you have to give the machine, you got to give it prompts. What's very interesting is I write my own book, but I have a book coach. Okay. So not a ghostwriter, but a book coach. And and the reason I have a book coach is when I wrote my first book, it was a book coach who kept saying writing a book. So he helped me put a book proposal together, helped me get an agent, and we went and pitched HarperCollins. HarperCollins saw this book coach, who's a very famous ghostwriter, and says, this guy would not, he's not ghostwriting your book, he's book coaching you. That means you're really good. But we are open to give you an advance because we know what you will actually have will be an actual book that'll come to us. Because in effect, what we're really doing is he's going to be your first line editor.
Got it.
Right. And the way he did it, he says, okay, remember chapter 1 we said was this to HarperCollins? He says, don't write chapter 1, Rishad. Answer these 8 questions. So he sent me 8 questions
wow.
and he said, write out the answers.
'Cause
Okay.
he was basically helping you with how to think framework to action.
Right. So, and he says, I want you to answer these questions. And I don't want to have you worry your little head about how to put a chapter together. He said, there's an art of putting a chapter together. He says, you'll never learn that. Okay. He says, you know how to write and you know how you have points of view and you can help people. Let me do the crafting of the chapter. Don't waste your time there. So I had 8 questions for each chapter. So guess what I do? I go to Claude and I go to Gemini and I go to ChatGPT OpenAI, which I subscribe to, right? And I say, okay, answer the question, answer the question, answer the question. I read their answers. I say, okay, not bad. I then take all their answers and I put it on a Word document, close that Word document, open up a new Word document, and I start writing. I then send my coach, here are all of my answers, here is all of AI's answers. We did not use a single line of AI in my entire book. However, my book was deeply AI informed.
Well, the
Okay.
reason for it is it kind of helped you in these
In thinking about issues and everything else.
Yeah.
But what eventually made my book sing is it had incredible use of language. It understood emotion. It understood who I was talking to. It had a point of view. It was not politically correct, right? AI doesn't do any of that. Yes, Grok 3 pretends to be not politically correct, but it's politically biased. Okay, there's a difference. The people who say we don't like politically correct stuff, I said, therefore you want politically biased stuff. I said everybody has a point of view, so bullshit about this, right? Which basically that's the key thing. So what happens is, and as a result, I tell people, like, I think one of the things, when I had the opportunity to speak to your team, I think I may have mentioned that how you future-proof your career today in this age of AI. And I basically, AI is not going to come and get your job. You're going to leverage AI and then you're going to do stuff and to be successful. But what are you going to do? And so I have this thing called the 6 C's. And I said, these are the 6 C's that you should do. And 3 of the C's are curiosity, creativity, and cognition. So cognition is learn, creatively connect dots in new ways, and be curious. The other three are what you have to do with other people. Convincing. Everybody's a salesperson. Everybody's going to have the same data and knowledge. How do you convince? Collaborate. You're going to have to work with either alien life forms or other human beings, right? And the last is communication. Practice better writing and speaking, right? So if you notice, nowhere did I say code. Nowhere did I say Mandarin. Okay. As somebody said, one of the people I read a lot and I recommend people is Ethan Malik, who's written this book, Codependence. But he also has this great Substack called One Useful Thing. His most recent issue, which was yesterday, is he basically uses English to code.
Wow.
Right now they call this vibe coding, right? Which is what do you feel in your code. And he was showing how it gets done. And in today's world, and I said, oh, this is awesome. And he shows how it's done. So my whole basic belief is not that we don't need amazing coders. It means world-class coders with this will be able to do much more stuff. A 10x coder will become a 20x coder. But what it also says is if you're a half-x coder, you won't have a job. Right?
It makes complete sense. It's kind of like
exactly.
thinking about it this way, like it just simplifying it. Everyone always asks, is LeBron better than Michael? As an easy just question, right? And Rishad, you're a Chicago guy, so I would assume your answer. But the point is, what Michael did in his basketball career, LeBron has a different ability today with the health coaching, the humidor, the sleeping, so as things evolve, could you imagine if Jordan had those capabilities? That's just how the world kind of evolves. So what you're getting at is if you're like a C player, this stuff's not taking you to A plus, right?
No, it's not taking you to A plus, exactly. But what it does do is it does allow a B player to become a B plus or A minus player, which is extremely important. Therefore, what it does do is it says a couple of things. Figure out what you are good at or would you like to be thing and focus on those. And don't try to basically going from being a D player to a C player by doing everything doesn't help you, right? So start focusing on the key things. And by the way, one of the things that you rightly said, my answer would basically be when you ask me that question, right? I always basically say Jordan was the best in his era.
Yeah, that's what I
right?
say too.
And LeBron was the best in this era. And you've exactly said it. And I said, if you think about it, it's like basically asking, is today's 50th ranked player would defeat Rod Laver, who is the only last time who won all four of the Grand Prix, all the four major opens, right? The 50th player would beat that player.
We're asking a question that's completely unfair. It's like kind of, you can't compare errors. Like do I think a guy like Willie Mays could have been great today? Maybe, but the errors are just always different. But you should always compare the errors greatest is the greatest. I agree with that completely. I always listen. I'm a dug-in Jordan person, but like you see the Kobe jersey, I respect that kind of hustle. But like you notice in the end, evolving is just exactly the way you're talking about. I think part of the problem with the AI world, we're obviously here at Sightly and leveraging it, and we've been building models since 2018, 2019. So we were ahead of the curve in ways. But ultimately, I completely agree with you. You're not gonna be able to take. So I kind of have boiled AI down. I'll just say this and see what you think. I've kind of boiled AI down to a great little league coach because I remember when I was a kid, like a great coach would know, like, I got this player, he's on my team. I can't get rid of him because the parents are going to get mad. I'm coaching these kids, and they would figure out a little thing that they could get out of each player.
Yeah.
I kind of equate AI right now like that. It's like a great little league coach. It could help you take those skills and move them to the next thing. Like if you had a guy that couldn't hit, but he was small, you tell him to take more pitches so that he get the first base on a walk. It's kind of like a little bit of that. And I think we'll get to a different place. Just switching gears for a second here, our audience is going to love you. Two quick thoughts here as we close. Like number one, if you could pick anyone dead or alive to go to lunch with, who would it be?
William Shakespeare.
Why?
because I believe that William Shakespeare is probably the most genius person in the world, the most read person in the world outside of maybe people who read the Bible and
And
the
and can
Quran.
stand the test of time.
Right. And what basically happens is if you look today, the hottest ticket in Broadway is Othello, right? We all say things without knowing it is Shakespeare. We may not even know it, right? So everything from which is you know take the current when it serves, prepare to lead thy endeavors, which is go with the flow, man, is Shakespeare. Uh, to There's all kinds of things. Reputation. Oh, my reputation. That's Macbeth, right? What people don't realize is almost everything is Shakespeare. In fact, I tell people that if you were to read 2 books and only 2 books in the world, okay, again, outside of any religious stuff, which people obviously, I respect everybody's religion. So if whether it's the Quran or the Torah or the Bible or whatever, but the only 2 books that I would suggest to people is Hamlet by Shakespeare and Don Quixote by Cervantes.
Not
Bo-
Rethinking Burke by Rishad Tobaccowala.
I wouldn't say that. No, those 2 books are what people don't realize is they were written the same year, 500 years ago, and
Amazing.
every single thing that has been done by any playwright, any author since
Still is
already
that
exists in that book.
crazy.
Already exists in that book, in one of those 2 books. Okay. And they both talked about something really, really interesting. At its very heart, what they talked about was the injustice that we only live so long. Right? So literally Hamlet is about life and death, and Don Quixote is about tilting windmills, the injustice of a short life. And therefore you have to go have adventures, right? And so what basically happens is they talk about human truths. So I always basically believe the world's greatest religious books are these amazing books. And they've been translated across every language. So one was written in Spanish, one was written in English. And that is the key thing. So sitting with, you know, Don, is that. But like today I was talking, like there are a lot of other people, but almost everyone's an artist. It's interestingly not a business person. It's not a actor. It's not an actress.
You know why you feel that way? In
Mhm.
my opinion, maybe I'm wrong. I'm gonna take a guess.
Yeah.
Because it sounds something similar to me. I always like to. I admire things a lot of the time that I can't do.
Right. Well,
Right?
one is, yeah, but it is that. But the other thing is something like this. I truly believe that art is the lie that tells the truth. Okay. And in many ways, I've always basically said if you spend a little bit of time spend an hour looking at paintings by Monet or spend an hour looking at paintings by Picasso, you will never see the world the same.
Wow.
Right. And that is what I actually do. And it's nowhere close to any of these people, obviously.
God, you know what that felt like? A strong haymaker from Muhammad Ali just now. That's what that felt like. That
Yeah.
quote. That's a
Yeah.
big.
It is. It is. And that's one of the key things when I write. My whole basic belief is it's kind of very interesting when people say, "What do you do?" If you notice what at the beginning I say, I help people see, think, and feel differently about how to grow themselves, their teams, and their business. So my thing is, if you read a book of mine, you listen to a conversation, you listen to a podcast, you read a Substack, if I've done my job right, at the end of it, you either have felt, seen, or thought differently than before you spent those 6 minutes or 6 hours, right? And that is what I basically believe we should aim for, which is make a difference, but a effective difference by helping other people see, think, and feel differently, and then you'll be good.
It, my last 2 questions I was gonna
Sure.
ask, they're kinda together, and we'll close with
Sure.
it. As you grow in life and as you grow in your career, how have you stayed? Because the book that got me to like you originally was Staying Human, right?
Yeah.
So what's kept you grounded to stay, You sound like you were probably the same person. I'm not saying you didn't evolve. I'm not saying you didn't change, but it sounds like if you met somebody who was in any point of their life, you would treat them the same. And what kinda helped you do that? So, I'd love you to give some advice to people as they rise in their career on how to not change in terms of ego and stuff like that. I would love to hear your thought there because it's one of the things, like, you rise, you get these titles, and some
Yeah.
people, they big league you, if you wanna call it that. So how have you stayed so humble to talk to people, stay grounded, and be able to be so human as you've grown?
So I believe there are three separate factors that have driven this. One, without a doubt, is the influence of my parents, who basically uh, started poor. And in fact, my father used to read books under streetlights because they could not afford electricity. And he had to walk to his college. And he just had enough money to basically he figured out that the best thing for the dollar was basically, for the rupee, was buying a particular type of pastry, right? And so his name was Tobaccowala, but there's a famous, in a Shakespeare play, there's a person called Toby Belch who keeps eating pastries. So all his friends called him Toby, right? Because he kept eating, because that's what he did. He ended up being really successful, and we lived in this building, and one day, once in a while, he'd look out and he'd say, see, the street light wasn't there anymore. Bombay had changed. But he said, that park is where the street light was. And now I look down on that street, right? And I'm living in this really expensive building, right? But he says, never forget that person, because that's who I am, right? And the day I forget that person, we don't do anything, right? So right now I run a foundation helping 10,000 people in India, right? Primarily those people, so that's one lesson. But the second and third lesson is very, very important, is this, which is the people that I have learned the best from and found most inspirational, whether it's a Jack Clues or Maurice Levy, a lot of other people, were these fourth-dimensional chess people, amazing thinkers, big winners, competitive, but deeply human. And what I began to realize is you didn't have to make a choice. And recently I did this podcast. I also wrote this thing called Old School Cool. And what they talk about is very interesting. They don't talk about masculine energy. They don't talk about hardcore. You know what they talk about? Humility,
Unbelievable.
patience, integrity. And the last and third is this, which is, if you want to engage with somebody, if you're not generous, no one's going to like you. And so the whole idea is, the day you basically believe that it's all about I, you, mine, you become a problem. And that third thing is, I forever remained, and I remember, and I tell people, I am an immigrant. And what does an immigrant do? They think like outsiders, and they think as underdogs, right? And I said, and somebody says, but I'm not an immigrant. I said, you are an immigrant. We're all immigrants. But if you assume that your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents were not immigrants, let's suppose you were uniquely born to this country. Let's say you are actually Native American, okay? You are also an immigrant, because we're all immigrating into the future.
Unbelievable. Listen, that you just walked out to Enter the Sandman right there, Mariano Rivera style. So there's really nothing else to talk
Perfect.
about today.
Thank
Rishad,
you.
thank you for becoming not only an amazing person in my life, but a friend, and we learn a lot from you. Thank you so much for joining Breaking
Thank
Through
you.
the Mayhem today.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you for all your success at Sightly.
Thanks, buddy.
Hi, I'm Hannah, one of the producers for Sightly's Breaking Through the Mayhem podcast. We want to thank you so much for listening to the show. If you want to learn more about the guests we had on today, we included additional information about them in the show notes. Finally, if you'd like to be on the podcast, or if you know someone that would make a great fit, you could fill out the form at sightly.com/podcast. We hope you have a great day.